World War III. Nobody wants it, except apparently the people in charge. While billionaires and politicians hide in their bunkers, the rest of us get front row seats to the apocalypse. And since every day already feels like a doomsday preview, maybe it's time to make an exit plan. But where on earth would anyone actually be safe when the nukes start flying? So grab your passports, because on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we are counting down the safest countries to survive World War III. Number 10. Ireland. Ireland stayed out of World War II, partly because it was a newly independent country, partly because of its general resentment of the UK. While it did offer some quiet support to the Allies and many Irish citizens volunteered to fight, the country itself remained officially neutral. So it's unlikely Ireland will rush to join the next global conflict. There's also the challenge of, well, just getting there. Germany had a very hard time making it to Britain. The Luftwaffe bombed the country relentlessly during World War II, but the only part of the UK that Germany actually managed to occupy was the Channel Islands, British dependencies that, to be fair, are much closer to France anyway. If Germany couldn't even make it across the English Channel in World War II, imagine the added hassle of crossing all of that land and then the Irish Sea. Another great thing Ireland has going for it: tons of herds and farmland. In 2023, Ireland produced 230% of the meat it needed to feed its population. Most of it is earmarked for exports. It's also a huge net exporter of dairy and dairy products. However, the country still imports many of its fruits, vegetables, and staples, making an Irish diet deliciously filling but also terrible for your arteries. However, if World War III breaks out, that would easily change. Ireland has a lot of farmland that can be repurposed to grow staple crops. And in the Emerald Isle Oasis, you'll have all the fresh water you could ever want. Ireland ranks third in the world for freshwater supply per capita, about 5,800 cubic feet per person, giving it some of the highest water availability anywhere on Earth. So maybe it's time you learned how to really pour a Guinness. But if damp, chilly islands aren't your thing, you could always head off to a tropical one instead. Number 9. Fiji. If you really want to avoid World War III, stay on the island where rich political and business elites like to vacation. They're not going to bomb their favorite 5-star bungalow resort. One point in Fiji's favor is its geographic isolation. The closest country to Fiji is the similarly tiny island nation of Tonga, around 500 miles away. The next closest, Vanuatu, 753 miles away. And if you're looking for an actual landmass, that would be New Zealand, which is almost 1,300 miles away, or about a week's sail across the open water, even with modern technology. And any war historian will tell you thousands of miles of empty ocean really creates a problem when trying to invade a country. And that's lucky for Fijians, as their army only has about 3,500 soldiers plus 6,000 reservists. That could bump up its whole fighting force to 9,500 people. An army that can entirely fit into a very large cruise ship isn't really the most intimidating fighting force, which is why Fiji has declared itself neutral in almost everything. They have good ties with Australia and New Zealand, the United States, and China. As Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka announced on the radio, "We are friends to all, enemies to none." Unhealthy relations between other nations should not affect Fiji's partnerships. There's yet another perk of a World War III reprieve in Fiji, especially compared to other Pacific islands. It has a lot of agricultural land. In 2022, 17% of Fiji's land was used for agriculture. That is enough, theoretically, to make Fiji self-sufficient. Not that it's actually tried to, of course. Fiji's massive distance from major nations likely to be involved in wars gives it another advantage. If the bombs start flying, Fiji, sitting in the middle of the Pacific, will be about as far from the action as you can get. And by action, we mean widespread death and devastation. Still, smaller islands are never entirely safe during global conflicts. They make for convenient refueling or supply stops. For Fiji, that risk rises if war ever breaks out between the US and China. That said, there are plenty of smaller, less populated, and less militarized islands that would be far easier to seize. It's a lot simpler to take over some small sandbars with 100 people than a country of 1 million people. But if you do want to avoid the island dilemma altogether, you better head up into the mountains. Number 8. Bhutan. This small kingdom has the unfortunate luck of being located close to a lot of conflict-prone Asian countries. It is sandwiched right in between China and India, but Bhutan has escaped most wars relatively unscathed because it has gone out of its way to stay out of them. Bhutan is the original mind-your-business country. The last real war Bhutan was involved in is the Boer War. Bhutan and British India fought against each other in the 1860s, and since then it's been relatively smooth sailing. Bhutan's location and geography also make it really hard to invade. That geography being way too far up in the Himalayas. Altitude sickness and steep inclines are gonna put off more soldiers than any standing army. 98.8% of the country is covered in mountains, with an average elevation of almost 10,800 feet. If you want to retreat to an even harder to access point, check out Gangkar Puin Sum. It's the highest point in the country, at over 24,800 feet. Sure, you wouldn't last long there yourself due to a lack of oxygen, but even if you made it 2/3 of the way up, most invading armies would think twice about following you. Bhutan has also so many forest resources that it's actually become the only net carbon negative country in the world. Its trees put away more than twice the carbon the country produces. 72% of the country is covered by forests. Great for getting resources and also for cover from aerial attacks. However, Bhutan might not be the safest place if China is involved in the next World War, since China has been gradually taking land from its small neighbor by just settling it, really. The goal is to secure access to the Doklam region, which sits dangerously close to India's Siliguri corridor, a thin strip of land linking India to its northeastern states. Control there would let Beijing cut off that vital connection in any future conflict. China would like to have access to this area so it could choke it off in the event of a China-India conflict. That being said, once China has fully taken over Doklam, they likely won't have that much use for the rest of Bhutan. Maybe. Perhaps we should move on to an even safer country though, just in case. Number 7. South Africa. Well, safer in terms of potential war risks anyway, because South Africa's crime rate is somewhere between never stop at red lights at night and war might give me a better chance of survival. The first rule helps you avoid carjackings, the second reflects the country's consistently top 10 homicide rate, a distinction no one wants. As of 2022, South Africa's homicide rate was 44 per 100,000 people. By comparison, New Orleans, the most dangerous city in the not exactly safe USA, recorded 46 per 100,000. But if you could put up with those negatives, South Africa might be worth a stay during a global conflict. Thanks to its location in the very southern part of the world, South Africa is pretty far from all the usual places that like to go boom. You'll see in a couple of other entries just how important this location can be. Also, while South Africa did join the Allied side during the former World Wars, it has declared neutrality in current ongoing conflicts, which may point to South Africa continuing to stay out of political and military fights in the future. South Africa is also a big country with plenty of land and resources. Its food self-sufficiency index, basically how well it can feed its own population, hovers around or above 100% for several key products. We're talking maize, wheat, apples, oranges, sugar, soybeans, beef, and veal. If the global supply chains collapse during an event like, well, let's just say World War III, a country that can feed itself will be in a relatively great position, which is only a part of why our next country may be well poised to weather the storm as well. Number 6. Argentina. Everyone knows Argentina has had an interesting history regarding World War II, mostly because it became a convenient refuge for freshly unemployed Nazis who would have rather skipped the whole facing justice thing and just start a new life on cattle ranches instead. But putting aside the sketchy ethics of that situation, why has Argentina historically been a refuge in the first place? Argentina is part of the Southern Cone. In other words, the place is most likely to stay calm and untouched in the event of World War III. What are the other ones? Wait and see! Argentina sits at some of the southernmost latitudes on Earth, and since most of the countries that start wars are packed into the northern hemisphere, that gives it a pretty comfortable head start on staying out of the blast zone. Second, Argentina has generally remained neutral during hot-button global conflicts. That includes both world wars and most of the Cold War. We say most because while Argentina never officially abandoned its neutrality during the Cold War, its governments in the 70s and 80s leaned hard into anti-communism. Some experts argue that that still counts as picking a side. But if you want a place to spend World War III and its aftermath, well, you want to be sure you can survive without outside help. Argentina is ranked as the most food self-sufficient country in the world. Argentina produces 273% of the calories that its population needs. Argentina also strikes that sweet spot between having a high enough degree of development that you could live there comfortably while decidedly not being a major world power. This decreases the chance that it would be the target of military strikes, mostly because there's nothing here that any major military would bother wasting a missile on. As far as geographic military advantages go, There is another country in the southern cone that has Argentina slightly beat. Number 5. Chile. The long, skinny land of Chile has several advantages. First of which, it has a giant, lethal mountain range cutting it off from most of the continent, the Andes. They average around 13,100 feet high, forming a natural wall that no invading army wants to climb. So unless they want to get lost in the snowy, jagged mountains and resort to cannibalism, getting to Chile through the Andes sounds like an epically idiotic idea. Another method of invasion, a sea landing from the Pacific Ocean. Either way would be a challenge, more so because Chile is extremely far from the usual conflict hotspots in Europe and Asia. It's also a place that can function relatively well on its own. It has a great fishing industry, to be expected when your coastline is 2,700 miles long. Chile rakes in around 2.5 million tons of fish each year between industrial and artisanal fishing. The country also has huge forest reserves and a lot of arable land. Chile is already focusing on building a sustainable circular economy so it can be financially resilient. The country's been praised by several publications for its careful management of natural resources, growing its economy while avoiding the overexploitation of key minerals like copper and molybdenum. In rankings, Chile has the most developed infrastructure on the continent as well, making your stay there relatively cushy. Lastly, Chile mostly stayed neutral during the Cold War, but it became a proxy battleground for the US and USSR, like so many other countries. It all culminated in the US-backed overthrow of Chile's elected president, Salvador Allende, replacing him with a military dictator, Augusto Pinochet. Today, Chile has made it clear that it is not taking sides. The country has good trade relations with both the US and China, as well as several other countries. Because, as the Hill notes, Chile knows that diversification brings stability. Of course, there are other countries that don't even need to diversify that much, because most people forget they exist. Number 4. New Zealand. New Zealand literally gets left off of maps. A lot. Seriously, it's become like a whole subreddit. But maybe they won't mind so much when it ends up being the reason everyone forgets about them during World War III. A map of battles fought between 1924 and 2024, a century not exactly known for its peace, shows exactly 0 in New Zealand. The country did send some troops abroad during World War II, even introducing compulsory conscription from 1940 to 58, but war itself has never reached its shores. Not to mention, the country is a top choice for rich people building doomsday bunkers. No less than Peter Thiel, one of the men who will likely be responsible for humanity's downfall anyway, got a New Zealand passport to escape any potential consequences of his actions. Douglas Rushkoff, a media theorist who's been cornered by multiple billionaires prepping for the apocalypse, says they view New Zealand as the ultimate escape destination for America's elite. The alternative plan of not ruining the world is just too hard, we guess. Billionaires looking to escape global collapse in the form of war or almost anything else asked Rushkoff simple, everyday questions. Questions like, where should they situate their bunkers? New Zealand. And how do I maintain control of my security force after all my money is worthless? Answer unclear. Just, normal, friendly conversation. Now their bunkers have features like indoor pools, bowling alleys, and artificial sunlight. You're probably not going to be able to get all that, but at least you can stay reasonably alive. So if you want to escape World War III, you might want to look into the place all the billionaires are fleeing to. You may have to live next to Peter Thiel, but we guess it beats not living at all. When it comes to self-sufficiency in terms of food and resources, New Zealand also ranks really highly, thanks to green pastures, sheep, and a whole lot of water. The country produces 185% of its caloric needs. But that doesn't even come close to our next country. Number 3. Uruguay. Uruguay rounds out the southern cone that experts refer to when talking about the countries least likely to be involved in World War III. Along with Chile and Argentina, these countries have enough development, infrastructure, and crops for both self-sufficiency and comfort. Of the 3, Uruguay is by far the smallest and the least likely to draw any attention. Ironically, one of the first battles of World War II happened just off of its coast, between British and German warships. Despite that, Uruguay stayed officially neutral for most of the war, while quietly lending support to the Allies. When it did eventually declare war on Japan and Germany on February 22, 1945, the war was almost over. Italy had already switched sides to the Allies. Over a year earlier, Hitler would shuffle off the mortal coil within 2 months, and the whole thing would end on September 2, 1945. Uruguay didn't even send any soldiers, they just said they declare war at the last minute. So it seems unlikely Uruguay will be rushing to get involved in the next armed conflict. Add in the fact that Uruguay is in the top 10 countries globally for food self-sufficiency, producing 232% of the calories its population needs. And you can see why it might be a good place to ride out the next round of global battles. Also, one reason the Southern Cone is safe overall is because it's not on the way to anywhere, except for maybe Antarctica. So there's very little strategic value in holding Montevideo, which may be why the US has never even bothered to set up a military base in the country. And the US loves setting up military bases in other countries. Our next country doesn't have one either. Number 2. Iceland. From 2008 to 2025, Iceland has topped the Global Peace Index rankings every single year. If World War III breaks out, you want to be in the number 1 destination for peace. Iceland has never participated in a significant war or invasion, with the tiny exception of the Cod Wars, which is exactly what it sounds like. A weird time in history where the UK and Iceland almost came to blows over fish. The only casualty was one guy who died accidentally while repairing a patrol boat. The country's geographic location in the, quote, middle of nowhere Atlantic Ocean also helps, as does the incredibly harsh weather. Averages below freezing and gale-force winds would deter most sane people from launching a land invasion. As one local put it, it's not Iceland if you're not blinded by your tears and struggling to breathe. You know what also helps? The fact that the population is just over 400,000 people. Who's gonna drag their troops halfway across the Atlantic to mount an assault on a cold volcanic island with the population of Tulsa, Oklahoma? Iceland also has no standing army, which might seem like a point against it, but considering other countries have very little reason to invade it, it's more of a plus. You can't call a country to fight alongside you when they have no one to fight with. The Coast Guard functions as the country's defense. Though Iceland is a NATO member, its lack of standing army means it receives NATO protection without really having to provide soldiers in return, which is a pretty sweet deal. Best of all, Iceland is a global leader in renewable energy. Local hydropower and geothermal sources generate 100% of the country's domestic electricity. It's also aiming to become totally fossil fuel-free by 2050. Why is that good? Because in the case global supply chains get disrupted, like they would be if every country decides to start bombing each other all at once, Iceland would mostly be okay in terms of its energy supply. And one thing you want to be in World War III is self-sufficient. Not to mention, since the next World War looks to be gearing up between China and the US, Iceland is in the wrong ocean to count as a pit stop. Our last country might seem obvious, but it is not for the reasons you think. Number 1. Switzerland. You might think Switzerland is included in this list because it is the oldest, quote, neutral country in the world. After all, the nation has been neutral for over 200 years. But there is another reason you might survive the AI-operated bombs in Switzerland, and it has nothing to do with politics. The country has one of the best bunker systems in the world. That's right, the snowy Alps, green hills, and charming lakes are hiding miles upon miles of doomsday bunkers. 370,000 nuclear bunkers to be exact, both private and public. Outsiders estimate that they're enough to shelter 114% of the country's 9 million strong population. So get to Switzerland before World War III breaks out, but maybe don't let so many people know about the bunkers. How did this even happen? Well, Switzerland first enshrined it into law via the Civil Protection Act in 1963, and since then, every new residential building must have on-site bunkers. Or developers have to contribute funds to a nearby public one operated by the state. They're outfitted to protect you against radiation as well. The ventilation systems are equipped to operate for 40 years, neutralizing the effects of nuclear fallout or chemical weapons in the process. Swiss cantons are also required to stock iodine for their entire population to counteract radiation exposure. But what are the Swiss doing with all of that space right now? Most of them use them as storage facilities. What better place to house your old coffee table and your PlayStation? But some have converted them into wine cellars, even saunas. Of course, Switzerland also has their usual ace card, besides political neutrality and bunkers, which is their banks. Money flows from huge corporations and rich politicians into Switzerland all the time, but even more so in times of political crises, since Swiss banks are thought of as stable, trusted, and comfortable with a certain amount of secrecy. So you may never need to use those bunkers, since the people and companies waging those wars probably don't want their banking system turning into dust. And if all else fails, get ready to ride out World War III down in Antarctica with the penguins. Some countries might be safe during World War III, but nowhere escapes the fallout forever. Watch Aftermath of World War III to see what the world would look like once the war is over, or click on this video instead.